Okay, let's go ahead and get started with the Coastal Sharks Management Board meeting. My name is Chris Bat-Savage. I'm the administrative proxy from North Carolina. I'll be serving as chair. Start with the approval of the agenda. Is there any objections to the agenda as written, or does anyone have any modifications? Okay, seeing none, that's approved. Next is the approval of proceedings from the April 2019 board meeting. Does anyone have any changes or modifications to the proceedings? Okay, those are also approved. Next is public comment for any items.
Nobody got any.
Okay, yeah, so for public comment, is there anyone in the audience that would wish to speak about anything for Coastal Sharks not on the agenda? There isn't. So next is the fourth item is to consider the postponed motion from the April 2019 board meeting. And with that, I'll pass it over to Kirby for his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick presentation I'll go through and then turn it over to Doug Messick to provide the Law Enforcement Committee's report out on this task. So as an outline, I'll give you all an overview, go through some background information quickly, briefly summarize the AP report, as I said, turn it over to Doug, take any questions you guys have, and then it's for this board to consider the postponed motion. So the board will consider today the following postponed motion from May 2019 for recreational shark fishing, which is move to require for state waters the use of circle hooks on lines intended to catch sharks. The board had requested the Law Enforcement Committee and Advisory Panel to provide feedback to help inform consideration of this action. So for background, NOAA's Highly Migratory Species Division approved Amendment 11 this year, and what it does is implements new commercial and recreational measures for HMS permit holders to address overfishing and rebuild the overfished North Atlantic shortfin mako shark stock. Those recreational measures include a new minimum size limit for shortfin makos of 71 inches fork length for males and 83 inches fork length for females. Additionally, it requires the use of circle hooks for HMS recreational permit holders, those with a shark endorsement, in all areas now. NOAA Fisheries had put forward to this board a request to implement complementary measures in state waters for consistency. So in terms of this circle hook requirement, it has been in place for HMS permit holders since 2017 as part of Amendment 5B. Specifically, it outlines the use of non-offset, non-stainless steel circle hooks, except when fishing with flies or artificial lures. It was also area specific, so it covered most of the Atlantic coast south of 4143 north latitude, so near Chatham, Massachusetts. And the aim was to reduce discard mortality with this measure. Research has demonstrated that circle hooks reduce gut hooking and increase post-release survival for shortfin makos. Now, Amendment 11 extends this requirement further north from that area, so it's all areas along the Atlantic coast where individuals with these permits are fishing for sharks. Now, the Commission had an advisory panel meeting on this topic earlier this month. There were 4 AP members in attendance, and we included that summary from that call in the briefing materials. And just to go over it quickly, given we are short on time today, all AP members indicated who were on this call support for requiring circle hooks for the recreational shark fishery. Reason cited was that a number of states have already moved to implement these measures, and they didn't perceive there to be an enforcement issue, rather that there may be challenges if the same measure is not adopted for all states and state waters, given this is now a requirement for federal permit holders with a shark endorsement. So their recommendation was to use circle hooks for the recreational fishery with 2 stipulations. The first is that given the motion that was postponed from the May meeting, their recommendation was to have that language be adjusted to mirror the federal regulatory language on circle hook requirements, including an exemption for fishing with flies or artificial lures. Just for background for this board, the regulatory text from Amendment 11 reads as the following. A person on board a vessel that has been issued or is required to be issued a permit with a shark endorsement under this part and who is participating in an HMS registered tournament that bestows points, prizes, or awards for Atlantic sharks must deploy only non-offset quotable circle hooks when fishing for, retaining, possessing, or landing sharks, except when fishing with flies or artificial lures. Now that's the language in the amendment. There is a compliance guide that NOAA provides on their website to help anglers who are looking for more simple versions of these regulations. And that language states all HMS permit holders are required to use non-offset, non-stainless steel circle hooks when fishing for sharks recreationally, except when fishing with flies or artificial lures in federal waters. So that is the advisory panel report. I'll turn to Doug Messick, and he can provide the LEC report.
Doug?
Okay, good afternoon. Earlier in September, we had a conference call, and then we discussed it at length again. We did send out a memorandum that I believe everyone's had a chance to look over, and what I want to read from an excerpt is that the Law Enforcement Committee therefore reiterates the position that despite the recognized potential value of a circle hook requirement to reduce release mortality in the recreational fishery, strict enforcement of a rule that depends on proving targeting or intent to catch sharks while with prohibited gear would be very difficult. Therefore, if the board were to implement such a requirement, the LEC emphasized that the importance of using intensive education and outreach to garner support for circle hook regulation. It was the consensus amongst the board that there be one definition of a circle hook that could be applied across all states as much as possible and into the federal waters, and also in absence of a strict definition that defined targeting, it was going to be a very hard regulation to enforce as to what a person was fishing for. We did look at some examples that Florida used. Florida, for their shore-based angler, has certain gear requirements and accessories that goes to prove the intent that you are shark fishing. But absent of any of that, it's a very hard regulation to enforce. We believe that as a compliance measure, because of the recognized benefits of the circle hook, compliance would be high throughout the user group, and that we would continue to support intensive outreach and education if this regulation was to move forward.
Thanks, Doug. Any questions for Kirby or Doug? Yes, Doug Hammonds.
Kirby, would you back up 2 slides maybe to the regular? Yeah, there you go. So the HMS requirement for circle hooks is only for tournaments? Is that the way I read it? Because it says, and who is participating in an HMS registered tournament?
I'm going to defer to Carol Brewster-Geis, who's here. She can provide a little more context on this language in Amendment 11.
Carol?
It does not apply only to tournaments. This is just one paragraph that Kirby grabbed. We have other paragraphs that apply to everybody outside of tournaments.
Thanks, Carol. Any other questions for Kirby or Doug? Yes, Mike Louisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe to Carol, if that's okay?
Yes.
Carol, when you were going through this rulemaking, was there any consideration for a minimum size for the circle hooks? Did you guys ever explore, establishing some size limitation that you couldn't use hooks smaller than that when fishing for sharks?
No, we didn't look at the sizes for sharks because sharks come in all sizes.
I'm sorry, I meant for the hook itself. Okay, thanks.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, seeing none, Kirby, I guess if we can get the postponed motion up on the screen.
Sure.
Okay. So at this point, we'll be looking to take action on this motion or entertain a substitute motion. So I'll open it up to the board for either discussion or a substitute motion. Tom Fody.
Do we need a maker and a seconder? Because there's no names up there.
No, Tom, my understanding is that given the board voted to postpone this motion, it's now a motion of this body.
Okay.
Louis Gillingham.
I think as law enforcement indicated, it would be helpful if the language was identical to what's in federal waters, and which means that I would recommend or suggest that we apply an exemption for artificial lures, which includes flies.
Okay, would you like to make that substitute motion or just kind of?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll make it.
All right. Let's see if we can get that up on the screen. Substitute motion to provide an exemption for the use of artificial lures and flies from the circle hook requirement.
So, Louis, in an effort to try to help this board, given there was consideration from both the LEC and the AP about specificity with this language, we've included a kind of a draft substitute motion that has more specificity of the circle hook requirement, or the specifications of what a circle hook is. So my question to you is, do you want to have that included in your substitute motion, or would you prefer to just have it specific to an exemption of artificial lures and flies?
I'd like to hear some input from Carol first. Is it defined in federal waters? I know the corrodable part is there, but again, what I'm looking for is something that is seamless between federal waters and state waters, as requested by law enforcement or suggested.
Okay, Carol?
We do have the non-offset, non-stainless steel in our federal regs.
I'd like to include that in the substitute motion then.
Yeah, so if you want to include that language, if you don't mind reading and I guess inserting that language in on what's on the screen might be the easiest way to do it.
Non-offset corrodable hooks, is that?
Louis, does that read how you'd like it?
I'm serving as a go-between, really. Carol, I don't think you include, do you use the term non-stainless steel or corrodable?
Carol?
We use both.
Okay.
So we actually define what corrodable is to mean non-stainless steel.
Okay. Yes. They apparently use both. I, again, was looking for a seamless definition between state and federal.
Would you mind just reading the motion up on the screen into the record, please, and I'll see if I can get a second.
Sure. Move to substitute to require the use of non-offset, corrodable, non-stainless steel circle hooks when fishing for sharks recreationally, except when fishing with flies or artificial lures in state waters.
Okay, substitute motion by Louis Gillingham. Can I get a second? Jay McNamee. Any discussion on the substitute motion? Roy Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thinking about what Doug Messick said, I'm really not that troubled about difficulties in enforcing this, because honestly, I think compliance, particularly over a period of time, will be pretty good with this. And the tackle shops will come on board. Tackle shops will be pushing circle hooks for anyone wanting to do shark fishing. So, you know, even if they can't make every single case, I think it's still a step in the right direction, and I think the greater good will overcome the difficulties in enforcement. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Any other discussion on this? Yes, Doug Haymans.
I may have missed it in Lewis's discussion a moment ago, but why the non-stainless? It's not in the reg. I may have missed that discussion.
Yeah, I may pass it over to Carol, but I think she said the language. I guess both were found in the regulations, but I'll hand it over to Carol to answer that one.
Yeah, we define corrodable in our regs to mean non-stainless steel.
So it's defined separately from the shark reg, from the circle hook reg, because F and whatever handline K just talk about non-offset corrodable circle hooks. It doesn't say non-stainless.
Correct. In our definition section, we define what corrodable means. And I am looking so I can read it directly for you. Corrodable hooks means a fishing hook composed of any material other than stainless steel.
Okay, further discussion? Yes, Carol.
Did the board want to consider a definition of what circle hooks should be?
Do we want to do that, or I guess ASMFC has a definition of circle hooks. Does the board think that that definition is sufficient for this action? Okay. Tom Fody.
I don't think we do have a definition of circle hooks. I know Maryland has a definition that we're going to try and use in striped bass, but I don't know if we have an overall definition of circle hooks for the commission.
Bob Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Tom, I believe the commission does have a definition. I don't have it in front of me right now. It was part of the law enforcement exploration of circle hooks a while ago, and I think they came up with a general definition that they felt would be more or less enforceable by all the states. So we could try to find that. It's in one of our documents. I just have to dig it out.
Mike Louisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Bob's point, yeah, Tom, I remember specifically that we used the language directly from ASMFC when we crafted our mandate for circle hook use in the Bay.
Okay, further discussion or questions? Kirby, I just have one just to make sure I'm clear and the board's clear. This motion would also include the required use of circle hooks for smooth dogfish, and I guess to Carol, with the federal regs, are smooth dogfish included with sharks for the use of circle hooks?
Yes.
Kirby?
To mirror what Carol said, yes, this would apply to that as well.
Okay, so we're consistent, just so the board's clear that that includes basically all the coastal sharks in the FMP. Lewis.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, this is a question for Carol, if I might.
Yeah, sure.
Carol, does that mean for spiny dogfish, would not be required to use circle hooks?
Carol?
HMS doesn't manage spiny dogfish, so yeah, it doesn't apply there.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, this, let's see. All right. So I guess I'll start with, is there any objection to the substitute motion, or does people need time to caucus before we do that? Does everyone need 30-second caucus? We'll go do that. Okay, is everyone ready? Or actually, Dan has a comment.
It's more of a question. The final expression in the memo, in-state waters, should that be moved up earlier in the motion so that it's clear that it's not just exempting flies and artificial lures in state waters? So should we say move to require the use in state waters? Would that be clearer?
Yeah.
Can I make that as a friendly amendment?
Let's actually look for some. I saw Doug's hand.
Another question once you finish with that.
Okay. All right. So, Louis, are you okay with that modification? And Jay? Okay. Doug Hamons.
What's the implementation date for this, if it passes?
So this is a substitute motion, right, to the previous motion. If you want, with this motion, you can specify the implementation date. That might be the cleanest way to deal with this, so that it's clear across. If this is substituted and it passes, then it would be just final action on that substitute motion. So again, if this board would like to make that clear in this substitute motion, that might be best.
Any thoughts on, I guess, including an implementation date in this substitute motion? Louis?
No, in fact, I was going to, once this was approved, then I was going to bring up that issue. I think it's an excellent idea, but again, it comes down to, and they had this discussion yesterday, when can the states all do it? We do have some of the legislatures that meet, we're coming up on that, but I'd like to give people enough time to get it done, realizing it doesn't become an issue till the state waters warm to probably 65, 70 degrees. So if it was put off till spring, if that would give all the states a chance to implement it,
Would that work for the other states, or do any states have concerns just relative to their administrative process for changes like this? Just looking for any states that would have a problem with implementing this by next spring. So a date in the spring would be good.
May 1st?
Okay. Anyone objective adding the date of May 1st? Doug?
How about July 1? I'm in the middle of rulemaking right now, having to go up to 83 inches. So I'm going to have to stop the rulemaking process and basically start it over again. And I generally don't do that during the middle of a legislative session. I was planning to have it finished by December, but I'll just put the brakes on until we get to April and then restart it and be done by July. So July would work better for us, assuming this is going to pass.
I would be fine with that date, realizing that a lot of states will get it done sooner if they haven't already. So at least it gives everyone something to shoot for.
Yes, we can implement it no later than July 1. Any comments on that? Tom Fody.
Since we have an August meeting, why don't we just do it by the August meeting this way? It will be, and compliance reports we're giving in the August meeting.
Kirby.
So in follow-up, in preparation of the August meeting, we tend to try to pull together that information ahead of time. So having a report out by August would be best. So if there's an implementation date before that meeting, we can best report out on the status of it to this board.
Okay, any other comments on the substitute motion? Okay, it's changed a little bit. I'll go ahead and read it into the record. Move to substitute to require the use in state waters of non-offset, corrodable, non-stainless steel circle hooks when fishing for sharks recreationally, except when fishing with flies or artificial lures, implemented no later than July 1st, 2020. I think everyone had time to caucus earlier. Do you need to caucus again based on this modified language? Okay, if not, is there any objection to the substitute motion? Okay, seeing none, it becomes the main motion. This will be final action, so we'll need to do a roll call vote. Unless there's no objection. Is there any objection to the main motion? All right, well, yes, get up on the screen. Okay, the main motion is up on the screen. The same language as the substitute motion I just read into the record. So is there any objection to the main motion? Okay, seeing none, it's approved. All right, next item is to set the 2020 specifications, and I'll hand that over to Kirby for his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go through this very quickly as this is a item for this board to consider now, but ultimately, if we proceed as we've done in recent years, it would be a vote taken following this board meeting. So as background, the proposed rule for the 2020 Coastal Sharks specifications from NOAA HMS's division was published on September 19th. It puts forward status quo quotas for 2020 that are the same as what's been in place the last 3 years. It proposes to open all shark management groups, fishing for those groups on January 1, 2020. And it also puts forward status quo retention limits starting at 25 large coastal sharks other than sandbar sharks per vessel per trip and adjust as needed, as was done over the past few years. So up on the screen is what these quotas would look like. We sent out to the board for your consideration last month when it was published each of these different values. So aggregated large coastal sharks, the proposed quota would be 372,000 metric tons, hammerheads 59,763 pounds, non-black-nosed small coastal sharks 582,333 pounds, black-nosed sharks 37,921 pounds, and smooth-hound sharks 3,973,902 pounds. For the no regional quotas, we have non-sandbar large coastal sharks, we have sandbar sharks, blue sharks, poor beagle sharks, and pelagic sharks other than poor beagle or blue. So if the board wishes to proceed as it had in previous years, once the final rule is published later this fall, the board can approve those specifications by email vote. So that's for your consideration today. If so, we would need a motion to do so. I'll take any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Kirby. Any questions for Kirby? Okay. Carol.
It's not a question so much as whether or not you wanted to hear an update on where we were and what comments we received.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, so Kirby explained what we proposed, but we also included in that questions for the public about the percentage at which we then adjust downward, and we also had questions, specific questions about the retention limit. And the reason for that is that the quota has not been taken in recent years. And this year, for those of you who pay attention, we actually have the retention limit all the way up at 55, which is the highest we can go. And we are still, let's just say, way, way, way below quotas for all the large coastals. So we received a lot of comments. A lot of people wanted to go up higher in the starting retention limit. A lot of people asked for a 36 start retention limit, going back to where we were in 2012 as opposed to the 25 that we've used in recent years. And there was also a lot of comment with people saying instead of 20, range somewhere between 30 and 40% in terms of when we make the adjustment downward. So we are considering all those comments, and we hope to have the final rule out by the end of November.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Any questions for Carol just based on that information she provided? Okay, so yeah, as Kirby mentioned, we got to wait for the final rule to be published before taking action. We did that by email vote after this meeting. What I'm looking for is a motion to approve the coastal shark specs via email vote after NOAA Fisheries publishes their final rule. So if someone would like to make that motion. Yes, motion by Ray, or by Roy?
Yes, I would make that motion. Do we have wording for that to put up?
Yeah, we're getting it up on the screen. So motion by Roy Miller. Do I have a second? Jim Estes. Okay, the motion is moved to approve the 2020 coastal shark specifications via email vote after NOAA Fisheries publishes the final rule for the 2020 Atlantic shark commercial fishing season. Any discussion on the motion? Any objection to the motion? Okay, motion passes. Okay, next is to consider approval of the 2019 FMP review and state compliance reports. Kirby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have not in the past been able to pull together this FMP review report for this board's consideration by this meeting, given the timing of when we get commercial landings normally. That normally is published later on in the year by NOAA Fisheries in early part of the winter, so January, February normally. So we've often had the delay, but we worked I think very well this year between ACCSP and NOAA's HMS branch to try to pull that information together beforehand. So I've got a brief presentation to go through, and then it'll be for you to consider action on this. So I'll walk through the status of the FMP, just a couple of the stocks that have had recent changes in their understanding of their population, and then commercial and recreational landings, and then there was a compliance component that we were going to provide this board an update on. So as you all are aware, the Coastal Sharks Management Board operates under a complementary FMP to NOAA HMS's Coastal Sharks Management. The Commission approved that FMP in 2008, and basically we are managing it through addendas 1 through 5. Addenda 5 was approved last year, and it provides the board more flexibility in adjusting measures through board action rather than through addendum in order to create more consistency with state and federal management when there is changes in federal waters. In 2019, the board also approved new short fin mako recreational size limits, and I will get into that later on in terms of the status of states implementing those changes. So there are multiple coastal shark species under this FMP, and it's important to understand that not all of them have been assessed. But some of the recent assessments that this board has been considering action on over the years that I think it's just important to reiterate again. Short fin mako in 2017 was found through an ICAT assessment to be overfished and experiencing overfishing. Sandbar shark, also assessed in 2017 through CDR 54, is overfished but not experiencing overfishing. And dusky sharks, that assessment completed in 2016 through CDR 21 found that the resource is overfished and experiencing overfishing. In terms of a summary of commercial landings of Atlantic large coastal shark species in 2018 were approximately 433 or 34,000 pounds dress weight, which is a 14% increase from 2017 landings. Commercial landings of small coastal shark species in 2018 was approximately 407,000 pounds, which is a 37% increase from 2017. This graph here shows you these different management groups stacked on top of each other to get a sense on how collectively they've fared as a trend over time. In terms of recreational numbers, Approximately 114,212 sharks were harvested during the 2018 recreational fishing season, which is a decrease from 2017 landings of approximately 38%. The non-black-nosed and small coastal shark group and pelagic group both comprise about 35% of the overall recreational harvest. In terms of compliance and de minimis status, all states have implemented the required measures for 2018. Addendum 5 did not adjust any of the specific management measures, so the states are still in compliance with measures that have been established previously. Massachusetts requests continuation of their de minimis status. In terms of an update on the short fin mako recreational measures, as I noted in my previous presentation, NOAA implemented different size limits for short fin makos for recreational federal permit holders, 71 inches fork length for males and 83 inches fork length for females. The board approved complementary measures to this for state waters with an implementation date of January 1, 2020. So in terms of an update of where we're at on that, nearly all states have either begun the process of implementing these regulations or have done so already. The one state I have not heard back from, we can see if they have any comments on the record today, is Connecticut regarding this change in regulations. And so if there are any other updates that states want to provide on this regulatory change, it'd be greatly appreciated. So again, there is board action to be considered today, which is accepting the 2019 F&P review for coastal sharks, state compliance, and de minimis status for Massachusetts. And I think given that this management board, there's a name attached to it, I would be remiss not to mention that there's a certain type of shark that has been captivating baseball fans in our nation's capital recently. It's known as baby shark, and it has become synonymous with the Washington Nationals. Its season has been on the brink of closure multiple times this year, and hopefully will end tonight with the Nationals winning the World Series. So with that, I'll take any questions, and go Nats.
Questions for Kirby on his report, or any updates from states on implementing the recreational mako shark measures for next year? Justin Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, Kirby, we should talk maybe after the meeting. I think maybe there's been a communication disconnect, because I thought we had provided affirmation or communication that we were in compliance with those regulations. So hopefully we can talk after the meeting.
Doug?
Yeah, and I'm, like I said earlier on the circle hooks, I may back up for a minute, and because I don't want to do a rule for circle hook only when I've got the exact same rule making its way through. And so I may not hit the January date. It may be the July date to have it all in place.
Okay. Yeah, is the board okay with that delay? It's unforeseen. They were in the process of rulemaking, but there's definitely challenges of having to do it twice. There's efficiencies of just going through rulemaking once. So is any concern by the board regarding Georgia? Okay, seeing none, I think we can accommodate that, Doug. Thank you. Yep. So we will need a motion to approve the FMP review and the de minimis requests. So looking for a motion. Okay, motion by Emerson Hasbrook. And Emerson, if you don't mind reading the motion up on the screen.
Move to accept the 2019 FMP review for coastal sharks, state compliance reports, de minimis status for Massachusetts, specific to the possession limit and fishery closure requirements for the aggregate large coastal and hammerhead species groups.
Okay, do I have a second? Malcolm Rhodes. Any objection to the motion? Okay, it passes. Passes unanimously. Okay, next item is to elect a vice chair. Looking for a motion on that. Malcolm Rhodes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to nominate Mel Bell as vice Chairman of the Coastal Sharks Management Board.
Can I get a second? Doug Hamons? Any objection to the motion? Congratulations, Mel. Any other business to come before the Coastal Sharks Management Board? Okay, if not, then we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
We're going to try to start straight bass a little bit early, so we'll start in about 15 minutes from now.